Guys, boxing gossip here on a Sunday. I am recording a video on some of the heavyweight fights that took place last night. Prior to this, I have done a video on the Tony Bellew fight, the Luke Campbell fight, and the David Haye situation. That video went up this morning, so do check that out on the channel if you haven't seen it yet. But the purpose of this video is to discuss some of the heavyweight action, most notably Erkan Teper versus Christian Hamer, and also Adrian Granat versus Franz Rill. We're going to start with Erkan Teper versus Hamer. I think it's fair to say Erkan Teper, one of my least favourite fighters in the sport of boxing. And I must say I actually quite enjoyed the fact that he took a loss against Christian Hamer. And I've got to say this is a real embarrassing loss that I believe should be career-ending. Erkan Teper made it into a number of people's top 10 heavyweight lists after some of his performances. We saw Erkan Teper brutally knock out British fighters. Michael Sprott, the Irish fighter Martin Rogan, was hospitalised, I believe, by Erkan Teper. David Price's career could have been ended by Erkan Teper with that knockout. He could have potentially killed David Price with that knockout. It was that brutal a knockout. Erkan Teper went on this huge, destructive run. And then it turned out that he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, notably anabolic steroids. We all know the story from here on in. Some bizarre situation meant that he didn't serve a long-time ban and was back boxing against Derek Rossi. Now, Derek Rossi took him the distance, which I found very, very peculiar, because we've seen Erkan Teper has the power to wipe out ranked heavyweights in a round or so. And yet Derek Rossi, who'd been sparked out by Audley Harrison in prize fighter, was able to take the almighty punching Erkan Teper the distance. Something wasn't quite adding up to me. And now he's gone and lost against Christian Hamer, albeit in a close fight. Now, I suspected Erkan Teper wouldn't be the same fighter, no longer having access to steroids. But I didn't suspect that he'd actually come up short against Christian Hamer. Now, Christian Hamer is not terrible. He's not a woeful fighter. But we've seen his limitations. He was stopped by Tyson Fury in a thoroughly one-sided fight. He was knocked unconscious, if memory serves. Apologies if I've got this wrong, but I believe he was knocked unconscious by Marius Wok. And for me, that's his level. Christian Hamer is a respectable heavyweight, some amateur pedigree, a top 50 heavyweight. But there's no way he should be beating the likes of Erkan Teper. And we've seen him go in and beat Erkan Teper. Now, I haven't watched the full fight. I've watched several rounds from the fight that have been uploaded on YouTube. And Erkan Teper looked horrendous in there. So slow, so plodding, so overweight. And clearly, to me, this is one of the clearest cases you will see of the advantages performance-enhancing drugs can give you in the sport. Erkan Teper, the guy who beat David Price, I would have expected to wipe out Christian Hamer inside 5 rounds. Yet last night, he looked thoroughly average. He looked like the kind of guy that David Price would have beaten up and kept on the outside at the end of his jab, to be frank. And really, having seen this loss to Christian Hamer, I think I'm almost in a position where I'm happy to say that everything else that's gone before in Erkan Teper's career kind of needs to be ignored, and it needs to be put down to the fact that the guy is a drug cheat. And it's very dangerous. When you've got a man like Erkan Teper off his nut on steroids, knocking out guys like Michael Sprott, Martin Rogan, David Price, it's very, very lucky no one got hurt. And actually Martin Rogan did get hurt, if memory serves, but it's very lucky no one got permanently damaged. I hope that this is the end of Erkan Teper. I think it was a black mark on the sport that he was allowed to continue. I think it did not show boxing in such a good light that his return was so quick and that he was able to be performing at a relatively high level so quick on. Wouldn't be as disappointed whatsoever if this is the end of Erkan Teper. Wouldn't be disappointed if we've seen him in the pro ring for the last time. As for Christian Hamer, shout out to him. I guess it's a good win for Hamer. It would have to go down as the biggest win of his career. And to an extent puts him back in the mix. I mean, it's hard to really rank Christian Hamer off the back of this. If you took the form completely literally, you'd have to say Christian Hamer enters the top 20 list. But I don't take it literally, because I believe there's two different fighters. There's Erkan Teper on steroids, who's a top 20 fighter, and then there's Erkan Teper off steroids, who to me last night looked like a top 100 fighter if we're being charitable. And that's what Christian Hamer beat. So, you know, this is going to be a profile-raising win for Christian Hamer. This is probably going to position him slightly higher in some rankings. And you never know, you may see him get a big fight off the back of it. Potentially he could be used as an opponent for the likes of a David Price or, excuse me, or a Dillian White or someone of that nature. We may see him pop up in a big fight again. But for me, Christian Hamer, we know his limitations. He's not a guy who's going to trouble the upper echelons of the heavyweight division as far as I'm concerned. But credit to him for this win. And yeah, I'm pleased that he was able to score such a victory against a guy who, quite frankly, I just don't like in Erkan Teper. So yeah, I mean, I thought Erkan Teper may struggle off steroids. I didn't think he'd be quite this bad. And it reminds me of Larry Olubamiwo. You know, Olubamiwo was never at the same level as Erkan Teper. But Olubamiwo put, I don't know, 8 or 9 back-to-back wins. There were people talking about him in the heavyweight division. He came off steroids, and now we've seen, I think he's barely won a fight since. You know, that's another example of how effective these drugs can be. And, you know, they're both of those fighters, Olubamiwo and Teper, their career has changed direction completely without the aid of those performing-enhancing drugs. So, interesting stuff. I'll be discussing that on the podcast this week with our PED correspondent, Irish Tom. You can be rest assured. Let's also talk about Adrian Granat versus Franz Rill. Adrian Granat, long-time viewers will know he's someone who I've had on the channel before. I've swapped 1 or 2 messages with him. Very, very nice guy. And a relatively highly rated prospect in the heavyweight division. Now, I spoke to a few people who watched the fight last night. The feedback I've had on Granat is very, very mixed. A lot of people think that they're looking at someone who could potentially go on to fight for a world title. Others, and I'm being frank, I like Granat, but I'll say it how it is. Others think that he's a guy with very limited defence, who's very, very slow, and who's a bit sort of uncoordinated in the ring. Now, once again, I've watched bits of the fight, which I watched in... it was kind of filmed on looked like a camera phone from one of the corners. So I'm not going to say I watched it in crystal clear, high definition. You know, if you were at the stadium, you probably have a much better picture. First and foremost is Granat is a novice. I think he's had 14 fights. He's only 25, so he's a real youngster for the heavyweight division. And he's just gone out and stopped Franz Rill in 5 or 6 rounds. 6 rounds, I think it was. Franz Rill, he's no world beater. He went the distance with Robert Helenius, who's known as a very big puncher. You know, I'd probably have Franz Rill in that sort of top 60 equation, if you like. And it's the biggest win of Granat's career to date. He's won by knockout. It's quite a brutal knockout, actually, watching it back. And I guess what we already knew about Granat is that he carries power. He obviously carries power at a decent level, because whilst Franz Rill was hurt against Helenius, he was able to get back up, and you know, he didn't necessarily look like he was about to get stopped, and Granat stopped him in a pretty definitive fashion. So Granat does carry power. What I would like to see from Granat is the development of a ramrod jab. I think Granat could do a lot from looking at peak Vladimir Klitschko, because he's got that tall frame, he's got that power from his backhand. I think what he needs to work on is his structure, keeping his hands up and really committing to the jab. At times, Granat can be slightly guilty of having almost a David Price-esque jab. It's a place finder. It's a pouring jab. It's not a sort of committed battering ram. And I think given his height, given his physique, if he developed a real stiff left-hand jab, he'd be much, much more effective. I also think at times, because he likes to lead with power shots, you know, despite his big physique, Granat, his inclination isn't to box robotically like Klitschko. His inclination is to throw bombs, you know, to lead with hooks, to lead with big power punches. And I think if Granat, you know, develop that construct of working things off the jab, it may have a sort of dual effect of not only keeping his opponent at distance and allowing him to get his other work back, but it may keep his hands up a bit higher, because there are times in this fight where Granat does look a bit open. You know, he's keeping his hands low, and you know, maybe he didn't think Franz Rill could trouble him, but you know, there's once or twice in the fight that you know, he's clipped, and you wouldn't want to see him getting clipped as he steps up to the level above Franz Rill, because that's when you start getting dangerous fighters. As for the speed, I would agree that Granat is not the most, he doesn't look the most naturally coordinated in the ring. Yeah, if you look at some heavyweights, let's give an example of another prospect. Let's talk Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker appears to have more athletic movement than Granat. Joseph Parker appears to have more natural coordination than Granat. You know, there's a punch that Rill lands in the first round, and it wobbles Granat a little bit. Not because Granat is actually hurt, but because his feet are kind of a bit tied up and he kind of stumbles back and looks a bit unsteady for a second. You know, what I'm getting at is he doesn't have the most natural coordination and the natural foot speed and hand speed and athleticism of a guy like Joseph Parker. Having said that, it's a bit of a trade-off with big heavyweights. You know, if you look at early Tyson Fury early on in his career, he at times looked a bit ungainly. He still does look a bit ungainly because it's hard to be so slick and Swiss in the ring when you're that tall. So, is that a concern? Maybe it's a concern. But I think for me, one way of bringing out the best in Granat would be the development of that jab. And if he can keep his hands high, work the jab, bring the hand back, double up that jab, push his opponent back, and then throw the power punch off it, I think he can be a real weapon. You know, he's only a youngster in the sport. It's crazy. He's younger than me, you know. And he's knocking guys out. And he's knocking guys out now at a level where we're starting to take note. He's knocking out guys who've been the distance with Hellenius. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes from there. I'm always inclined with heavyweights to say don't rush them. You know, there's no need for Adrian Granat to fight for a world title in 2017 or 2018. He's got 10, 12 years ahead of him in terms of his career if he wants to go that long. And I think honing his craft, learning his game would be a very useful chore for him. I'd actually be looking at putting him in with opponents at the Franz Rill level or one grade higher. One guy that would make sense, especially given they fought on the same night, would be Christian Hamer. Yeah, Hamer's not a guy with dynamic power. He's a smaller guy. He's a guy I'd make Granat a big favourite over, actually. I think Granat could, you know, box him long, and I think Granat can actually stop Christian Hamer. But Hamer's a slight step up from Franz Rill. Hamer's obviously also coming off a career-high victory against Erkan Teper, which we've already discussed. So, for me, that's a fight that makes natural sense. And that sort of level of opponent is who I'd like to see Granat in with. Someone who's going to give him a few more rounds than just a first-round stoppage. Someone who's going to test out what he's learning, bring him on a bit, but at the same time, probably not risk getting him beat. A few more high-class learning fights, and you know, working on that jab, working on that defence, and Granat can go places in the sport. Let me know your thoughts, people. Let me know your thoughts on both of these fights, the future for both winners, the future for both losers. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. Do leave your comments in the section below. And if you haven't done so before, please take the time to subscribe. Thanks for watching.